My daughter-in-law destroyed my son. She took his company, his home, his dignity, and left him penniless on my doorstep. She thought she'd gotten away with it. What she didn't know was that she'd just awakened a sleeping giant, a mother with a secret fortune and a score to settle. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Valerie Barrett. At 68, I had settled into a life of quiet, earned peace. As a retired head nurse, my world had been one of controlled urgency, of life and death decisions made with a steady hand and a clear mind. Now, my days were measured by the slow unfurling of my prize-winning orchids and the comfortable rhythm of my pension and the substantial, secret retirement fund I'd meticulously built over 40 years of careful investing. A detail I kept to myself, believing a woman's security should be her own quiet business. My greatest pride, however, was my son Jamal. At 42, Jamal was a successful architect, a good man with a kind heart, his father's easy smile, and a talent for creating beautiful spaces. When he fell in love with Rochelle Davenport, it was with the total, consuming passion I had always wished for him. Rochelle, at 38, was undeniably stunning. She was a whirlwind of ambition, sleek in designer suits, her words a cascade of business jargon about synergy, disruption, and scaling. She was, as Jamal proudly told me, a force of nature. And from the moment she entered our lives, I felt the barometric pressure in our family begin to drop. A storm gathering on a distant horizon that only I seemed to see. Their wedding was a lavish affair, funded largely by Jamal's success but orchestrated entirely by Rochelle's expensive tastes. I watched from the sidelines, a proud mother with a growing, gnawing unease. I saw how Jamal's focus shifted from the integrity of his architectural designs to the brand identity Rochelle insisted he cultivate. His classic, thoughtful style was replaced by the flashy, flavor-of-the-month trends she favored. Their beautiful home, once a testament to his clean, elegant aesthetic, became a showroom for her materialistic desires, each new art piece or piece of furniture more ostentatious than the last. "It's about projecting success, Valerie," Rochelle would explain to me with a patronizing smile when I'd visit, gesturing vaguely at a new, impossibly uncomfortable-looking sofa. "You have to spend money to make money. Jamal is a brand now, and I'm his brand manager." Jamal, my sweet, grounded Jamal, seemed to drink it all in. He was utterly captivated by her, blinded by a love so complete it left no room for caution. My gentle warnings, my quiet questions about their burn rate, the wisdom of launching her high-risk lifestyle ventures, funded by his established firm, were met with a new defensiveness from him. "Mom, you just don't understand modern business," he'd say, a touch of Rochelle's condescension creeping into his voice. "Rochelle is a genius. She sees the bigger picture. We're building an empire together." But I, who had managed hospital wards and balanced life and death budgets, knew the difference between an empire and a house of cards. I saw the way Rochelle treated Jamal's hard-earned money not as a resource to be respected, but as an endless well from which to draw for her own vanity projects. A failed jewelry line, a curated subscription box that bled money, a disastrous foray into event planning. Each failure was spun as a learning experience or a necessary pivot, and each time, Jamal would pour more of his firm's capital into her next brilliant idea, his own confidence increasingly propped up by her relentless, empty hype. My visits became less frequent. The atmosphere in their home was suffocating. Rochelle's polite facade wore thin whenever I was around, her small slights and dismissive comments about my quaint life or my old-fashioned financial prudence becoming more pointed. She made it clear I was a relic from a life Jamal had outgrown. And the saddest part? Jamal, lost in her spell, began to see me through her eyes. The last time I had them over for Sunday dinner, just a few months before the collapse, I'd made Jamal's favorite, my slow-braised short ribs. Rochelle had picked at her plate, pushing the food around with her fork. "It's lovely, Valerie," she'd said, "but so heavy, so traditional. We're really trying to focus on a cleaner, plant-based lifestyle now. It's better for our brand alignment." Jamal had just nodded in agreement, leaving his plate half full. The short ribs I'd been making for him since he was a boy were now off-brand. It was a small thing, but it felt like a door slamming shut, locking me out of the new exclusive world they were building, a world where a mother's love, her traditions, her very essence were subject to a brand review. The unease I felt was no longer just about their finances. It was about my son's soul. He was hollowing himself out to make more room for her ambition. He, the architect, was letting her demolish the very foundations of his character. I saw the stress behind his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he signed another check for one of her ventures. He was losing himself and he didn't even know it. I continued to manage my own affairs quietly, my secret retirement fund a silent testament to a lifetime of prudence. I'd watch them from a distance, my heart aching with a sense of impending doom. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed that my son's good sense, his kind heart, would eventually win out over her glittering, hollow promises. I prayed for him to see the subtle poison she was feeding him before it was too late. But my prayers, I would soon learn, would go unanswered. The storm I had seen gathering was about to make landfall, and it would be far more destructive than I could have ever imagined. The collapse came with a brutal, stunning swiftness. 4 months, I had watched from the sidelines as my son, Jamal, funneled more and more of his architectural firm's capital into Rochelle's bottomless pit of ventures. I knew he was leveraged to the hilt, that the foundations of his own success were being systematically weakened to prop up the facade of her ambition. The final blow came in the form of a disastrous commercial real estate project Rochelle had insisted they invest in, a sure thing that turned out to be a swamp of zoning issues and bad debts. It bankrupted him. Not just the joint ventures but his own respected firm, the one he had built with his talent and, in the early days, a small, loving investment from his late father's insurance policy. It all came crashing down. Creditors called, contracts were cancelled, his reputation, once so solid, was suddenly in tatters. I waited for the call from Jamal, expecting a desperate, heartbroken son seeking his mother's comfort, perhaps even admitting his folly. The call came, but it was not what I expected. "Mom," he said, his voice a hollow, defeated whisper. "It's over. Everything's gone." "Oh, Jamal, my love," I began, my heart aching for him. "I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. We'll figure it out together." "There's nothing to figure out," he said, his voice flat. "Rochelle, she's handling it." A cold dread washed over me. Rochelle was handling it? The architect of the disaster was now its executor? 2 days later I found out what that meant. Jamal called again, his voice sounding even more distant, more broken. "She's leaving me, Mom," he said, the words barely audible. She said she can't be tied to a failure." The full, calculated cruelty of Rochelle's plan became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just about her ventures failing. It was about her systematically stripping him of everything before making her exit. The house they lived in, the one Jamal had bought with the profits from his first big project, had been put into a trust last year, a trust Rochelle had convinced him was for tax purposes. A trust to which she was the sole trustee. The luxury car, the art on the walls, even his own business accounts had been so cleverly intertwined with her shell companies that when the bankruptcy hit, all the debt was his, and all the remaining convertible assets were somehow legally hers. She had played him with the skill of a master chess player, sacrificing her pawns to capture the king. "Where will you go, Jamal?" I asked, my own home, my sanctuary, suddenly feeling like the only safe harbor in a raging storm. I don't know," he stammered. She's having me removed from the house. Her lawyer sent the papers." The final act of her vicious play unfolded a week later. I had been trying to reach Jamal, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Worried sick, I finally drove to his beautiful, gated community, the one he had been so proud of. I found him on the curb, sitting on a single suitcase, staring into space as a sleek moving van pulled away from the house he no longer owned. I pulled over, my heart shattering at the sight of my son, my brilliant, successful son, so utterly broken, so publicly discarded. "Jamal," I whispered, getting out of the car. He looked up, his eyes hollow, filled with a shame so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. "She took everything, Mom," he said, his voice a raw croak. "Everything." He told me then about their last conversation. She had met him at the door with her lawyer, her face a mask of cold indifference. She had handed him his suitcase. He had begged, pleaded, asked her how she could do this after everything they had built. And Rochelle, his wife, the woman he had given everything to, had looked him up and down with a contemptuous sneer. What we built, she'd scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. You built nothing, Jamal. You were just the money. And now the money's gone. I can't be tied to a pathetic failure. I have a brand to protect. She had then turned, walked back into the house that was no longer his and closed the door, leaving him standing there homeless, penniless and utterly broken on the pristine cobblestone driveway. He had called me his pathetic failure. She had mocked his inability to see her moves coming, laughed at his foolish trust. She had not only taken his assets, she had taken his pride, his confidence, his very sense of self. I looked at my son, this shell of a man sitting on a suitcase on a suburban curb, and the years of my quiet unease, my gentle warnings, my suppressed frustrations at Rochelle's blatant manipulation, coalesced into a single diamond-hard point of rage. This wasn't just a bad investment. This wasn't just a messy divorce. This was a calculated, ruthless destruction of my child. Rochelle Devereaux had underestimated me. She had seen me as a quiet, simple old woman, a relic to be politely ignored while she fleeced my son. She thought she had won, that she had successfully excised the failures from her new, glittering life. She had no idea that in her arrogance, she had just awakened a force she was utterly unprepared for. She had destroyed my son. She had declared war on my family. And I, Valerie Barrett, a retired head nurse with a lifetime of experience in dealing with crises and a very private, very substantial war chest, was about to make her regret it. My son was coming home with me. And then the real fight would begin. Bringing Jamal home felt like turning back the clock 30 years, but in the most heartbreaking way possible. The confident, successful architect who had left my nest years ago was gone, replaced by a ghost. He moved through my quiet, comfortable house like a stranger, his shoulders slumped, his eyes holding a vacant, haunted look that terrified me. He'd sit for hours in his old childhood bedroom, staring at the walls, at the faded posters of architectural marvels he'd once dreamed of emulating. The man who had designed soaring glass towers was now confined to a small room filled with the ghosts of his own lost potential. He barely ate. He barely spoke. He was a shell hollowed out by Rochelle's calculated cruelty. The first few days I simply let him be. I made him his favorite foods, dishes he hadn't tasted in years, since Rochelle had declared them too rustic for their sophisticated palate. I'd leave a tray outside his door and hours later find it untouched. I, who had spent a career managing the most critical medical situations with calm authority, felt utterly helpless in the face of my own son's profound depression. The humiliation had been absolute. Rochelle hadn't just left him. She had orchestrated his ruin with a precision that was both brilliant and monstrous. She had made him a laughingstock in their social circle, a cautionary tale among his professional peers. The pathetic failure, as she had so cruelly branded him, was now living in his retired mother's spare bedroom, his phone silent, his future a terrifying blank slate. My initial white-hot fury at Rochelle began to cool, solidifying into something far more dangerous. A cold, methodical resolve. My son was broken, yes. But I, Valerie Barrett, was not. I had spent a lifetime saving both lives and money. I had faced down arrogant surgeons, comforted grieving families, managed chaotic emergency rooms. I would not be undone by this predatory, gold-digging viper. After a week of watching Jamal drift through my home like a specter, I knew I had to act. I made him a cup of strong, sweet tea just the way he liked it when he was studying for his exams and sat down on the edge of his bed. The room was dark, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Jamal, I began, my voice soft but firm. We need to talk. He didn't look at me, just continued to stare at the wall. There's nothing to talk about, Mom. It's over. She won. She took everything. She took money, Jamal, I said, my voice gaining a steely edge. She took a house. He did not take your talent. He did not take your mind. And she certainly did not take your mother. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a deep, weary shame. But I was so stupid, Mom. I let her. I ignored you. I let her talk down to you, dismiss you. I chose her, her ambition, her poison, over everything. Over you. A single, painful tear traced a path down his cheek. And now, look at me. I have nothing. You have me, I said simply. And that, my son, is far from nothing. I let that sink in for a moment. Now, I continued, my tone shifting from maternal comfort to the no-nonsense efficiency of the head nurse I once was. I need you to tell me everything. Every document you signed. Every account she had access to. Every shell company she created. I need the full picture of her business ventures. I need ammunition. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than despair appeared in his eyes. Confusion. Ammunition? For what? So her mom. Her lawyers are sharks. I have nothing, no way to fight her. I reached out and took his hand, my grip surprisingly strong. You have nothing, Jamal. That is true. But I paused, taking a deep, fortifying breath. I have been a very, very careful woman for a very, very long time. That evening I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went to the back of my walk-in closet, behind the stacks of neatly stored winter blankets, and retrieved the old, heavy lockbox I'd inherited from my own pragmatic mother. Inside, beneath my late husband's military service medals and my own nursing school certificates, were the passbooks and statements for a series of quiet, conservative investments I had started making the day I got my first promotion to head nurse 40 years ago. A secret retirement fund. A just-in-case nest egg that no one, not even Jamal, knew existed. It was my independence, my security, my final testament to a life of hard work and careful planning. I sat Jamal down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once done his homework, and I laid out the statements. He stared at the figures, his eyes widening in disbelief. The numbers were substantial, a small fortune built on decades of quiet, disciplined saving. Mom, I had no idea. He stammered. Of course you didn't, I said, not unkindly. A woman should always have a room of her own, Jamal, and a bank account no one else knows about. Now, I said, tapping the statements with my finger, this is our war chest. Rochelle thinks she has won, that she has taken everything of value from the Barrett family. She is about to learn that she merely managed to bankrupt the son, not the mother. And the mother, I added, a cold, hard smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity, is about to hire some very expensive, very aggressive lawyers. She thinks you were a pathetic failure. We are about to show her what a truly spectacular failure looks like. Hers. The flicker of confusion in Jamal's eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, incredulous hope. The sleeping giant, the quiet, competent mother he had taken for granted and allowed his wife to disrespect, had just awoken. And her first order of business was to dismantle Rochelle Devereaux's world, piece by painstakingly documented piece. The week following my revelation to Jamal was a quiet whirlwind of strategic planning. The fog of depression that had enveloped my son began to lift, replaced by a focused, almost feverish energy. For the first time in years he looked at me not as his retired old mother, but as a formidable ally, a commanding officer outlining a battle plan. His architectural mind, once clouded by Rochelle's manipulative glamour, was now laser-focused on a new project, the systematic deconstruction of her fraudulent empire. He spent days at my kitchen table, which had become our makeshift headquarters, poring over the documents he had managed to salvage from his old office. He pieced together the timeline of Rochelle's ventures, the flow of money from his firm into her myriad of shell companies, each with a different, ridiculously aspirational name. Elysian Lifestyle Holdings, he'd mutter, shaking his head. Apex Global Strategies. They were all just post office boxes and a fancy website she paid someone in another country to build. He drew diagrams, flow charts, tracing the path of his life's work as it was siphoned away into her personal accounts. His shame was still there, a raw, palpable thing, but now it was being channeled into righteous, analytical fury. He was using his brilliant mind not for building but for unbuilding. Meanwhile, I deployed my own secret weapon, my retirement fund. I wasn't interested in hiring a merely competent lawyer. I wanted a shark. I wanted the best. After several days of discreet research, I found them. The law firm of Warren, Finch and Associates, a firm legendary for its ruthless litigation in cases of high-stakes financial fraud. They were notoriously expensive, the kind of lawyers men like my late husband and I would never have dreamed of needing. But my secret fund, my 40 years of quiet, disciplined saving could afford them. I met with Diane Warren herself, a senior partner whose reputation preceded her. She was a woman my age with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately respected. I didn't come to her with a tearful, emotional plea. I came to her as I would have to a chief of surgery, with a clear, concise summary of the situation and a complete dossier of evidence. I presented Jamal's flow charts, copies of the fraudulent business filings he'd been duped into signing, and my own bank statements showing my initial investment in his architectural firm decades ago, establishing my long-term stake in the assets Rochelle had plundered. Ms. Warren reviewed the documents in silence, her expression grim. "Mrs. Barrett," she said finally, looking up at me, her gaze direct. "Your daughter-in-law is not just a cruel opportunist. She is a sophisticated con artist who has engaged in systematic fraudulent conveyance of marital and business assets. What she did to your son, and by extension to the family's financial legacy, is egregious." She paused. "And your son was, forgive me for being blunt, a fool." "He was a fool in love, Ms. Warren," I corrected gently. "A dangerous but common ailment. Now he is simply a fool who has learned his lesson. My concern is not his past folly but his future and the reclamation of what was stolen." A small, appreciative smile touched her lips. "Understood. The case is strong. Your meticulous records, combined with your son's insider testimony on how Rochelle structured these shell companies, give us a powerful foundation. We can sue not just for a favorable divorce settlement for Jamal, but to pierce the corporate veil of her fraudulent companies and claw back the assets she illegally transferred." "I want you to be ruthless, Ms. Warren," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want her to understand what it truly means to lose everything. I have the funds to see this through to the very end." She nodded. "Consider it done, Mrs. Barrett." The first salvo was fired the following week. Rochelle Devereaux, likely basking in her new life as a wealthy, self-made entrepreneur in her stolen home, was served with a lawsuit so comprehensive, so detailed in its accusations of fraud, embezzlement and marital financial waste, that it reportedly left her speechless. The suit also came with an emergency motion to freeze all her known assets, bank accounts and shell companies, pending the outcome of the litigation. Her world, her meticulously constructed kingdom of lies, was about to be put under a very powerful, very expensive microscope. She had thought she had outsmarted my son, that she had neutralized him, left him broken and penniless. She had made one fatal miscalculation. She had forgotten about me. Jamal, when I told him the lawsuit had been filed and her assets were frozen, looked at me with an expression of awe. "You really are a force of nature, Mom," he whispered. "No, Jamal," I replied, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm just a mother. And a head nurse. I don't like seeing my family bleed out from a wound that can be treated." It was time to stop the hemorrhaging and go on the offensive. The sleeping giant had awoken. And Rochelle Devereaux, who had so cruelly mocked my son's failure, was about to learn what a real failure felt like, delivered with the full, unforgiving force of the law, paid for by the retired old mother she had so foolishly written off. Rochelle Devereaux, as expected, did not go down without a fight. Blindsided by the lawsuit and the immediate freezing of her assets, her initial shock quickly morphed into a furious, cornered animal rage. She hired a team of equally slick, equally aggressive lawyers and the battle began. But she had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of her opponent. She thought her fight was with Jamal, the broken man she had so easily manipulated and discarded. She failed to realize her true adversary was me, Valerie Barrett, a woman with a lifetime of experience, a substantial and secret war chest, and the cold, unyielding fury of a mother whose child had been grievously wronged. The legal proceedings were a brutal, grinding war of attrition, a world of depositions, discovery motions, and forensic accounting that would have been overwhelming had I not had Ms. Warren and her formidable team by my side. Rochelle's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They attempted to portray Jamal as an incompetent businessman who had run his own firm into the ground, claiming Rochelle had merely been trying to salvage what she could from his sinking ship. They tried to paint me as a meddling, vindictive old woman, manipulating my failed son to lash out at his more successful ex-wife. It didn't work. Ms. Warren, a master strategist, dismantled their narrative piece by piece. She had Jamal, now clear-eyed and articulate, testify for hours, detailing with heartbreaking precision how Rochelle had systematically gained his trust, praised his every move, all while encouraging him to sign documents that shifted assets into her name, to take on debt for her ventures, to isolate him from his old, more cautious business advisors and from me. He admitted his own foolishness, his blindness, with a humility that was far more compelling than any of Rochelle's arrogant denials. Then came the forensic accountant's report, a devastating roadmap of Rochelle's deceit. It traced the money, my son's money, our family's money, from his architectural firm's accounts, through a dizzying maze of shell companies, and directly into payments for her luxury cars, her designer wardrobe, her lavish trips with friends, even a down payment on a secret condominium she had purchased in her maiden name. Her business ventures were revealed to be little more than elaborate fronts for her personal enrichment, with no real products, no real strategy, just a constant, voracious appetite for Jamal's capital. My own deposition was quiet, dignified, and I was told utterly damning. I recounted my years of quiet observation, the subtle warnings I had given Jamal, the condescending way Rochelle had treated me, the utter devastation on my son's face when he had appeared on my doorstep, homeless and broken. I presented my own financial records, proving I had no need for Jamal's money, that my actions were not born of greed, but of a mother's need to see justice done for her child. The turning point came during Rochelle's own deposition. Under Ms. Warren's relentless, surgical questioning, Rochelle's polished facade began to crack. She couldn't explain the purpose of her shell companies. She couldn't justify her extravagant expenses as legitimate business costs. She stumbled, contradicted herself, her answers becoming increasingly shrill, her arrogance giving way to a raw, ugly panic. When Ms. Warren presented her with flight manifests and hotel receipts for a lavish business trip she'd taken with another man while Jamal was at home struggling to keep his firm afloat, she finally, catastrophically, lost her composure. Her outburst, a tirade of accusations and self-pity, was a de facto confession of her character, if not her crimes. With their legal position crumbling, Rochelle's lawyers pushed for a settlement. Rochelle had to sell the condominium she'd bought in her own name, liquidate most of her assets, and the court ensured a significant portion of the value was returned to Jamal. It wasn't everything he had lost. Much of it had been squandered on her lifestyle, but it was a substantial life-altering sum. It was enough for him to clear his debts and start again. The final court hearing to approve the settlement was a quiet affair. Rochelle was a shadow of her former self, her designer suit looking like a costume on a defeated actress. She wouldn't look at me nor at Jamal. She had lost. Her empire, built on deceit and my son's broken heart, was in ruins. As we walked out of the courthouse, Jamal put his arm around my shoulders. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. You saved me." "I didn't save you, Jamal," I said softly, looking up at him. "I just gave you the tools to save yourself. You did the hard work. You faced the truth. The legal war was over. The cost had been immense, emotionally and financially. But as we walked out into the bright afternoon sun, a new chapter was beginning. Jamal was no longer the arrogant, blinded man who had been so easily duped. He was humbled, wiser, and for the first time in a very long time he was free. And I, his retired old mother, had proven that my quiet strength, my hidden resources, and my unwavering love were a force more formidable than any con artist's greed. The foundation for his new life, his real life, was now being built, and this time it was built on truth. The sound of a judge's gavel, even one ratifying a settlement rather than delivering a verdict, has a satisfying finality to it. It draws a line. The past, with all its pain and deceit, is on one side. The future, uncertain but full of new possibility, is on the other. For Jamal and me, that day marked the true beginning of our new lives. Rochelle Devereaux, I heard, left the city shortly after the settlement was finalized. Her reputation was in tatters, her ill-gotten gains largely confiscated or spent, her network of friends having vanished at the first sign of scandal. She was a cautionary tale whispered at the cocktail parties she could no longer attend. I felt no pity for her, only a quiet, weary sense of justice served. She had sown the wind, she had reaped the whirlwind. My secret retirement fund, though significantly depleted by the cost of the legal war, had served its purpose. It had been my sword and my shield. What remained was more than enough for my own peace and security. But more importantly, the legal victory provided Jamal with the capital and the clean slate he needed to rebuild. He didn't try to resurrect his old architectural firm, a business now tainted by Rochelle's influence and its own spectacular failure. Instead, humbled and with a newfound appreciation for his roots, he did something that surprised me. He came to me with a new business plan, not for a flashy high-risk venture, but for a small, sustainable firm that would focus on creating beautiful, practical, and affordable community spaces. Libraries, small parks, senior centers. He asked me, his mother, the retired head nurse with a lifetime of practical wisdom, to be his partner. Not just a silent investor but a true partner, a consultant on the human side of his designs. I spent years designing glass towers for egos, Mom, he told me one evening, his voice filled with a quiet conviction I hadn't heard before. I want to build things that matter now. Things that serve people. Things that would have made Dad proud. And I can't do it without you. I don't want to. And so, Barrett & Son Design was born. We started small, working from my home office, the same room where I had once plotted Rochelle's downfall. Now it was a room filled with blueprints, with hope, with the easy, respectful collaboration between a mother and her son. It was a joy to watch him work, to see his passion for his craft rekindled, now tempered with a wisdom and humility that had been so painfully absent before. He listened to my ideas, valued my insights, and treated me not as a relic, but as his most trusted advisor. The financial payback from the lawsuit was one thing. But this rebuilding of my son's spirit, this forging of a new, honest partnership between us, this was the true victory. We used a portion of the settlement funds to find Jamal a modest but comfortable apartment of his own. He insisted on paying me back for my legal expenses, setting up a payment plan from his new company's first profits, a gesture of accountability I accepted with a proud nod. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the court case had settled, Jamal took me for a drive. He pulled up in front of a beautiful old brick building in a neighborhood that needed a little love. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked, a nervous smile on his face. "This is our first big project. The city just approved it. It's going to be the new Northside Community Health Clinic and Senior Center." Tears welled in my eyes. A place for healing, for community, for people like me. "Oh, Jamal," I whispered. "It's perfect. Your father would be so proud." He reached over and squeezed my hand, his grip firm and sure. "No, Mom," he said, his own eyes glistening. "He'd be proud of us. I never got my life savings back in the way I had once known them. Rochelle had seen to that. But what I got instead was infinitely more valuable. I got my son back, not the arrogant man blinded by a toxic love, but a better man, a humbler man, a man I could be truly proud of. My quiet strength, my hidden resources had not just delivered justice to a woman who deserved it. They had provided the foundation for my son's redemption. Rochelle thought she had left him a pathetic failure. She had, in her own cruel way, given him the chance to become a man of substance. And I, his retired old mother, had the profound, quiet joy of watching him build his new empire, one built not on lies and greed, but on integrity, community, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. That was a payback no amount